Hey everyone, get comfortable here. I had some questions about the ginkgo leaf. So here's the ginkgo cutout. Here's my finished and textured ginkgo leaf. It's got a little bit more awesomeness to it. I'm gonna kind of go over what I do in order to get from this to this. So design-wise, the first thing that I normally do is, if I'm doing something organic, I will print off pictures or do some research on what it looks like in real life. What type of texturing, what type of lines, and then once I have an idea of how the finished natural product is going to look, I make a plan on how I'm going to texture, hammer, and make it look like I want it. In the other videos, we talked about hammering from the center of the petal and then fanning out and then going back to the center and fanning out. That's going to be equally important here. So you can see all the lines run straight up in a fan pattern to the tips of the leaves. So what I'll do on my metal just before I do my hammering is I will draw just some template lines to give myself a visual reference on where I want to be hammering and making sure that I'm staying kind of in line with that. So now that I know that I don't really have anything crazy going on around here, it's just a nice fan, and I've drawn that out here, the next thing I do is select kind of which hammer I'm going to use. This is one that I made. I showed it before. It's an old file. It's been drilled out and then polished on a couple different ends in order to create a wide cross peen. Works really well for texturing. Here's one similar to that. Same thing, old file. It's got a little thinner and a little bit more round, and then this one's got a little bit more defined point on it. The one that I was using before, this guy, is a Japanese, I think it's a watchmaking hammer. I'm not exactly sure, but it's pretty decent. I like it. It's got a real loose handle, so I had to glue it into place. And then this is another one that I showed earlier. Nice small little cross peen. So all of these would be equally necessary in order to make that cross peen fan pattern. Now for something this big, I want to try and match my cross peen width to about what my metal is. I don't want to take a small cross peen like this and strike. Get my hands up here. So if I take and I strike from center point out, I'm gonna leave probably a hammer's width gap here, and I'm going to create probably a line of layering textures right along this upper part of the leaf because the cross peen isn't quite wide enough to get to the edge of the leaf. Now that's not always a problem. I just find it easier to use a hammer with a wider cross peen so that I can do all of that once and just fan. Center point and fan, and then come back to center point and fan out. So this is my reference point, this center point right there. So for me, I ended up using this hammer, and the reason for that was I can get all the way across the leaf with basically one width of the hammer, and then I can rotate up and rotate up. Now, one reason why we're fanning out like that and not just starting in one place and going out is because metal moves. It doesn't disappear when you hammer it. So what I want to do is, if I were to hammer on this side this way, slowly I'd start moving the metal the way that I'm hammering, and this portion of the leaf would go down farther than it is now because I'm pushing the metal in that direction as I'm hammering it. But if I start from my center point and I hammer this way and then come back to my center point and hammer this way, I get an equal distribution of the metal as it's fanning out. Same thing is true on a straight line. Say if I fold something in half and I hammer on this side only, my metal is going to move in this direction. And then opposite of that, when I hammer on this side, my metal is going to move in this direction. So basically, having an idea or a plan on how you're going to hammer or how you're going to texture is going to be equally as important as what hammer you choose. I'm going to make a video kind of on a little bit more of this design and how I look, how I kind of plan out when I'm going to make something a little bit more organic, or I'm going to do something a little bit more artsy. You can make pea pods, you can make leaves, you can all different types of things using the same type of hammering techniques. It just depends on how you use each particular part of the hammer and which hammer you use. Now, if you don't have a wide cross peen, what you can do is get some cold chisels and end up rounding out the end so it's no longer a sharp point. Cold chisels are designed to cut metal when it's cold, so it has a nice sharp defined point on them when you buy them. What you want to do as a jeweler or somebody who's going to be forming metal, if you don't want to cut your metal, you want to round that out. So rounding that out then creates basically the end of a cross-peen hammer on a punch. What I can do then is find which cross-peen, or excuse me, which cold chisel I want that I've modified into basically a chasing tool, and hammer with the cold chisel along the same axes that we discussed when it comes to making your plan on how you're going to form the metal. Now, pretty much sky's the limit. When you're making your own tools, you a lot of the time will make a tool for a project and then end up putting the tool into the cabinet and not using it for a while, and then making another tool later on. But these are cheap. You can find them at garage sales and all sorts of stuff, antique stores, big buckets of metal, free giveaway stuff, and they're all different sizes. Most of them are worn out when you buy them, but that's okay because you're going to be grinding off the end and smoothing it out in order to make something that's going to be more of a texturing or a chasing tool. And so lastly, once you have your plan on your hammering, get organized and just watch how the metal moves. You don't have to move it fast. You don't have to hit hard. It's basically just creating a hammer plan. If there are any other questions or you have questions about tools or anything, let me know.